Good afternoon, welcome to the Midday Mull for Monday the 31st of May. We continue to reflect on the second chapter of Acts. Last week we saw the Holy Spirit came upon the disciples and they stepped out into the streets of Jerusalem praising God. And a crowd gathered around them, and the crowd, we're told, were utterly amazed, and they asked, "Aren't all these who are speaking Galileans? Then how is it that each of us hears them in our own native language?" Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and they go and list the countries that they'd come from. And they end up saying, "We hear them declaring the wonders of God in our own tongues." Amazed and perplexed, they asked one another, "What does this mean?" And I had two thoughts. The one is the disciples were speaking of the wonders of God. And as I was thinking about the wonders of God, today is one of the first really cold days of the winter. And I was reminded of somebody that a couple of years ago just made a comment and said, "Oh, I hope that this winter there's a good couple of days where we hit sub-zero temperatures." And when I asked them about it, they said, well, if it doesn't get that cold, then a whole lot of insects just proliferate. Whereas if you get to those kind of really cold temperatures, it kills off a number of the insects and you maintain a balance in the garden. And that just struck me, the wonders of God, that the cold, even though we might not find it pleasant, has a role to play, same way as the heat. And God has this wonderful world with all the parts of it fitted together so well. That's part of the wonders of God. But I'm sure that the disciples weren't talking about the weather. They were talking about Jesus, what he'd done, what he'd said, how he'd died on the cross, what that meant in terms of sacrifice for us, and that he'd been raised to life again, that they'd seen him ascend into heaven, and that the Spirit had come upon them. That was the kind of wonders they were talking about. And as Christians, we need to keep our eyes on God and just see those wonders. Ask him to open our eyes that we might see it more clearly. And that wonderful God will actually shape our thinking and our discourse. And it'll be a discourse that is full of joy and enthusiasm. This isn't just a God, but we're talking about the wonders of God. And the second point that I thought about was that the crowds were amazed and perplexed, and they asked one another, "What does this mean?" And they didn't have an answer. They had to wait until Peter stood up and explained it to them. And we need to remember that sometimes as Christians, when we're talking about God, people outside of the faith will struggle to understand. It will not make sense to them. They will ask, "What does it mean?" And there will be no answer. It requires somebody of faith, a Peter, you or I, to be able to just gently talk to them about God and explain what it means. And as we do it, to be praying within ourselves that God would open their eyes and open their hearts, that they too would perceive God, that would lead them to a conversion, and that they would come to understand for themselves what God has done. So as you go through today, see the wonders of God. Be encouraged and enjoy God for all those wonderful things that he's put in our world, even the cold weather. And be prepared to explain that to people who don't know him. That way, God's kingdom will grow, he will be glorified, and we will be blessed.